Vancouver Island, 1991. A land of ancient forests, towering mountains, and mysteries whispered on the wind. For the Anderson family, this island was paradise. It was where Sarah Anderson, a 34-year-old single mother, was raising her identical twin daughters, Emily and Lily. They were just 5 years old, and the future seemed like a blank canvas, ready to be painted. They were inseparable, living in a small, cozy house in Souk, a coastal community on the southern tip of the island. Their routine was simplicity in its purest form. Sunny mornings playing on the beach and car rides through the forest where the children would sing cheerful songs. Sarah worked as a yoga instructor, and at night she would read stories to her daughters, the warm light of the fireplace dancing on their faces. No one could have imagined that this picture of perfection would soon turn into one of the most terrifying and baffling stories in Canada. On July 15, 1991, the Anderson family vanished. At first, neighbors thought they were just away on a camping trip, but when the third morning came and went, and Sarah's car was still in the driveway and the lights in their house remained off, a chill of fear began to spread through the community. Phone calls to Sarah's number went to voicemail. Her friends started to worry. The Suka RCMP were called for a wellness check. What they found inside the empty Anderson home, however, was not reassuring. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, with 3 bowls of cereal, the cutlery still on the table, as if the family had just gotten up for a meal but never returned. No windows were broken. No doors were forced open. There were no signs of a struggle, just complete silence. The house appeared to have been abandoned in the middle of an ordinary moment, a moment that was never concluded. This was the beginning of a mystery that would haunt Canada for over a decade. A single mother and her 2 young daughters disappearing off the face of the earth without a trace. The only thing investigators found, tucked under the living room rug, was a crumpled photograph. A picture that showed a smiling Sarah with her 2 young twins in her arms, standing in front of a pine forest. For the police, the image was a mystery. Why was the photo hidden, and why was it the only thing left behind? What happened to the Anderson family? Now, before we delve deeper into this story, we'd like to know where you're watching this video from. Please leave a comment with your city or state, and if you've ever lived on Vancouver Island, tell us if you've heard about this case. Doing so helps us better understand who we are and what you like to watch. The first few days were a blur of confusion and frantic activity. The Suki RCMP, now joined by search and rescue teams, launched a massive operation. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras scanned the dense forests of Vancouver Island, and police dogs, trained to track human scent, were brought in from as far away as Victoria. The community, once so peaceful and quiet, was now a hive of worry. Missing person posters with the smiling faces of Sarah, Emily, and Lily appeared on every telephone pole and storefront. Friends and family couldn't believe it. Sarah was known for being an incredibly responsible mother. She didn't drink, she didn't do drugs, and she was devoted to her children. A spontaneous disappearance, a sudden decision to leave, seemed completely out of character. Initial theories focused on the most immediate possibilities. Perhaps they had gone for a hike and gotten lost? It was a common occurrence on the island with its rugged and unforgiving terrain, but investigators quickly dismissed this. Sarah was an experienced hiker and a survivalist. She knew the area well and wouldn't have gone on a difficult trail with 2 small children without telling anyone. Besides, their hiking gear was still in the garage. The search expanded. Volunteers, armed with maps and flashlights, combed every trail and back road, looking for any sign, any piece of discarded clothing, or any misplaced item. They found nothing. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. The second theory, and the one that began to gain traction, was far more sinister: foul play. The absence of a forced entry, the untouched breakfast table, it all pointed to the possibility that Sarah knew her assailant. Investigators began looking into Sarah's personal life. She had been divorced for 2 years from her husband, Mark, the girl's father. He lived on the mainland in Vancouver and, according to his alibi, had been there the entire week of the disappearance. He was interviewed extensively but seemed genuinely distraught and cooperative. He was never named a suspect. The detectives also spoke to Sarah's new boyfriend, a man named Robert. Robert claimed they had a quiet evening the night before, and he had left around 9 p.m. He worked in construction and had a plausible alibi as well. The police's attention turned to the last known sighting of the family, A cashier at a local Souk grocery store recalled seeing Sarah and the girls on the afternoon of July 14th. They were buying groceries, smiling and laughing. The cashier said Sarah looked perfectly normal, maybe a little tired, but nothing unusual. She remembered the girls were wearing matching pink jackets, a detail that would haunt the community for years to come. Then came the first break in the case, or so it seemed. A week after the disappearance, a Souk resident reported seeing a man in a dark-colored pickup truck parked on the road near the Anderson home in the early morning hours of July 15th. The man was described as being in his late 40s with a dark beard. The police created a composite sketch. The public was on edge, and the news media went into a frenzy. Was this the man who took the Anderson family? The truck was never found. The man was never identified. The lead went cold. The initial theories of a tragic hiking accident or a random abduction began to fade. This was not a case of getting lost. This was a case of being stolen. And the entire community felt it. The frantic search soon turned into a long, agonizing waiting game. The initial media firestorm began to die down, but for the residents of Vancouver Island, the disappearance was now a ghost that haunted their daily lives. The missing person posters, once a beacon of hope, began to fade in the sun and peel at the edges, their images of Sarah, Emily, and Lily becoming more and more a part of the backdrop. The police had no new leads. They had interviewed everyone close to the family, friends, colleagues, and even casual acquaintances, but a solid motive for the abduction never materialized. Sarah Anderson was loved, not a target. Her daughters were just children, and their disappearance seemed completely random and therefore terrifying. The lack of a ransom note was also baffling. If this was a kidnapping, why hadn't anyone tried to contact the family? The silence was deafening. With the official investigation stalling, the media and the public started to form their own theories. A popular one involved a new cult that had recently settled in a remote part of the island. Stories circulated of the cult's strange rituals and its reclusive leader, who was said to have a fascination with pure souls. Was it possible that Sarah and her daughters were chosen as a sacrifice? The RCMP followed this lead, discreetly interviewing members of the cult and searching their compound, but they found no evidence connecting them to the Anderson case. The cult leader seemed to have an unshakable alibi, and the theory was eventually discarded, though it continued to fuel whispers on the island for years. Another theory was that Sarah, overwhelmed by the struggles of being a single mother, had simply taken the girls and fled. Some people pointed to the fact that Sarah had been under financial strain from her divorce, but her friends adamantly rejected this. Sarah would never put her children in harm's way, and she would have never left them without their clothes, toys, and other belongings. The untouched breakfast bowls were proof she had never intended to leave. A few months after the disappearance, an anonymous call was placed to the Souk RCMP station. A frantic male voice claimed to have seen Sarah and the girls on a ferry headed for the mainland. He provided a detailed description of their clothing, which matched the descriptions on the missing persons posters. The police tracked the ferry manifest and interviewed passengers, but found nothing to corroborate the story. The call was a dead end. Investigators were running on fumes, chasing leads that led nowhere, and the case of the vanished Anderson family was slowly but surely turning cold. The hope of finding them alive was fading, replaced by the grim reality that they might never be seen again. The island mourned their loss, even though no body had been found, because the absence of any trace was more terrifying than the thought of a final resting place. The mystery of what happened to Sarah, Emily, and Lily Anderson became a part of Vancouver Island's history. A chilling ghost story that everyone knew but no one could explain. The long silence that followed was broken only by the occasional false lead, each one a glimmer of hope that quickly faded into darkness. The passage of time did little to heal the wounds left by the Anderson family's disappearance. The missing person posters, once a ubiquitous sight, were now gone, either taken down or torn apart by the elements. The case was no longer front-page news, but it remained a persistent and chilling local legend. 14 years had passed since that fateful July day in 1991, and the case was officially classified as cold. The Souk RCMP had long since closed the active investigation, and the files were relegated to a dusty cabinet in a back room, a testament to a mystery they could not solve. For the girl's father, Mark, the pain was a constant companion. He had never stopped hoping, never stopped looking, but the lack of any new information had eroded his spirit. He moved to the interior of British Columbia, trying to find some semblance of peace, but he was always a ghost of the man he once was. Over the years, the number of false leads and bizarre theories only grew. Psychics would call in, claiming to have visions of the family. One psychic insisted they were living on a commune in the United States, while another claimed they had been buried in a shallow grave near the Olympic National Park. Each tip was followed up on, no matter how outlandish, out of a desperate need to find a single, solid piece of evidence. The police even revisited the theory of the man with the dark beard in the pickup truck, re-releasing the composite sketch to the public in a last-ditch effort. But the man was never found, and the truck was never identified. The case was a puzzle with 1,000 missing pieces. The most persistent and haunting theory revolved around the idea that the Anderson family had simply vanished into the vast and untamed wilderness of Vancouver Island. The island is riddled with abandoned logging roads, old mines, and forgotten homesteads. Locals whispered stories of a secluded, off-the-grid community that didn't want to be found. Were the Andersons living there, safe and sound, but choosing to remain hidden? Or had they stumbled into something far more sinister? These questions lingered in the minds of anyone who remembered the case. The idea that a mother and her 2 children could disappear so completely and without a trace was an unsettling thought, a reminder of just how fragile life could be. On a cold autumn morning in 2005, a group of hikers was exploring a remote, overgrown logging trail near the old town of Jordan River, not far from Souk. They weren't looking for anything, just enjoying the quiet beauty of the old-growth forest. Then they stumbled upon it, a nearly hidden, long-forgotten mine shaft. The entrance was a dark, jagged hole in the side of a hill, partially blocked by fallen logs and overgrown brush. Out of curiosity, they peered inside. The light from their flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing a cavernous space. And there, near the entrance, was something that made their hearts stop. Buried in the muddy soil, half covered by decaying leaves and dirt, were 2 small, worn children's shoes. The shoes were pink. The hikers, shaken to their core, immediately called the police. An old, forgotten mine shaft on a remote logging road was a perfect place to hide something, or someone. The shoes, caked in mud and grime, were carefully collected and sent to the forensic lab for analysis. Initial tests confirmed what everyone feared. They were children's shoes. A closer examination of the faded soles and tattered laces revealed they were the exact size and style for a 5-year-old girl. The Souk RCMP, with a new generation of officers who had only heard whispers of the Anderson case, pulled the original files from the dusty cabinet. The search for evidence from 14 years ago had just been reignited. The discovery sent a shockwave through the island and the rest of Canada. The media, which had long since moved on, rushed back to the story. The small, worn shoes became a haunting symbol of a missing family and a cold case that suddenly felt terrifyingly warm. The new team of investigators, armed with modern forensic technology that was unavailable in 1991, began their work. They went back to the old store where Sarah and the girls were last seen. The cashier was long gone, but the store manager, a man who had worked there since the 80s, remembered the police questioning. He was shown a picture of the shoes. He studied it for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "They look like the ones they were wearing," he said, his voice quiet. He recalled Sarah buying 2 pairs of shoes, one for Emily and one for Lily. He remembered because a new shoe line for children had just arrived, and the girls were excited. The detail, so minor at the time, was now a crucial link. The forensic analysis of the shoes yielded even more shocking discoveries. A small amount of trace DNA was found inside one of the shoes. It was degraded, but it was enough to be compared to the DNA of Sarah's ex-husband, Mark, and other family members. The results were a match. The DNA belonged to one of the Anderson twins, either Emily or Lily. There wasn't enough to tell them apart. The news was both a breakthrough and a devastating blow. The shoes had lain undiscovered for 14 years, a silent testament to a tragedy that had gone unsolved for too long. The question now was, what else was in the mine shaft? The RCMP, working with a team of professional cavers and search and rescue experts, began the dangerous task of exploring the deep, dark corridors of the abandoned mine. They carefully navigated the crumbling timber and loose rocks, their flashlights piercing the inky blackness. Every step was filled with tension. They were no longer looking for a missing family. They were looking for a gravesite. The deeper they went, the more the air grew thick with a sense of dread. The silence was broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the drips of water. They found nothing, not a single bone or piece of clothing. It was as if the shoes had been deliberately placed near the entrance and nothing else. The mystery had just deepened, the discovery of the shoes raising more questions than answers. Who had put them there? And why? The discovery of the shoes without any other remains was an impossible riddle. It suggested a staging, a deliberate act to mislead investigators. But who would go to such lengths? The police revisited the original case files with this new perspective. They began looking at the smallest details that had once been dismissed. The crumpled photo found under the rug, for instance. Why hide a family photo? It was a clue that had gone nowhere for 14 years, but now it felt significant. The photo showed Sarah, Emily, and Lily smiling happily in front of a backdrop of tall, distinctive pine trees. After painstaking research, a new detective on the case named Detective Miller used GIS technology to match the unique tree formation and hillside gradient in the picture. He identified a remote area north of Souk, near an old, defunct sawmill. The area was off the main roads, accessible only by a single winding logging trail. It was a place where people rarely went. The team, led by Detective Miller, went to the location. The ground was soft and covered in years of pine needles and decaying leaves. They used ground-penetrating radar, which revealed a large, shallow indentation just a few feet from where the photo would have been taken. The indentation wasn't a grave, but something else. It was too wide and too flat. They started to dig and found what appeared to be the remnants of a tent, a small makeshift campsite. But it was not a campsite used for a vacation. The area had been stripped clean. The only things they found were a few rusted cans of tuna, a broken flashlight, and a child's plastic toy soldier. The toy soldier was unique. It was a distinctive green color, and it had a small crack on its arm. Sarah's friends had mentioned that Emily and Lily were fond of playing with toy soldiers, a small detail that no one had thought to be important. The discovery of the campsite, however, only deepened the confusion. Who would have been camping there with Sarah and the girls? And why? They knew Sarah was not a camper. This was not her style. It was a strange clue that didn't fit with anything they knew about her. It was as if she had been forced to camp or was meeting someone. The investigation was now moving into the realm of possibilities they hadn't considered before. Not a random act of violence, but a planned, orchestrated event. But who was the mastermind? The police went back to Mark, the girl's father, and Robert, Sarah's ex-boyfriend. Their alibis were still strong, but the detectives now looked for any small inconsistency, any detail that had been overlooked. The case had been reopened, but the answers seemed to be hiding just out of reach, in the long-forgotten past. And so the focus turned to the silent years, those 14 years between the disappearance and the discovery of the shoes. What secrets were hidden in that passage of time? What false leads had sent them on a wild goose chase? The truth was still buried, waiting to be unearthed. The re-examination of the case files with fresh eyes and new technology was about to yield its most shocking discovery. Detective Miller, an expert in digital forensics, requested that the original police report on the anonymous phone call be pulled from the archives. The call, which had occurred a few months after the disappearance, claimed to have seen Sarah and the girls on a ferry to the mainland. At the time, it had been dismissed as a false lead. But Miller decided to dig deeper. The original report contained a brief, handwritten note from the responding officer. Caller's number traced to payphone in Victoria. No other info. A payphone in Victoria, a busy city, was a dead end in 1991. But in 2005, with modern digital analysis, it was a brand new lead. Miller had a long-shot idea. He sent a request to the telecommunications company to see if they still had any archived records for payphone calls from that specific date and location. It was a long shot, but they were in luck. A massive archive from the 90s, thought to be lost, had been recently digitized. The records showed a second call made from that same payphone to a phone number in Squamish, British Columbia, a number that had not been looked into by the original investigators. Miller traced the number. It was registered to a man named David Shaw. When the police ran a background check on David Shaw, their jaws dropped. He was a convicted felon with a history of fraud and a past arrest for assault. Even more chillingly, he was a longtime associate of Sarah's ex-husband, Mark Anderson. They had worked together on several construction projects in the 1980s. This was a link that had gone completely unnoticed in the original investigation because the police had focused only on Mark's alibi and his personal life. The new theory was terrifyingly simple and logical. What if the disappearance wasn't about Sarah at all? What if it was about the twin girls, Emily and Lily, and a twisted custody plot? The police flew to the interior of British Columbia to interview Mark Anderson again. This time, they didn't just ask about his alibi, they asked about David Shaw. Mark initially denied any recent contact with Shaw, but when confronted with the evidence of the phone call, he broke down. He confessed to meeting with Shaw on a remote logging road in Vancouver Island the day before the disappearance. He said it was just a business meeting, but the police knew better. This wasn't a business meeting. It was an act of betrayal. Mark's long, sorrowful years of pretending to be a grieving father were a sham. The police arrested Mark Anderson, and the news exploded across Canada. The cold case was now an active, high-profile murder investigation. They also arrested David Shaw and began to interrogate him. The details that emerged from Shaw's confession were horrific. He admitted to making the anonymous call to the police and to being involved in the abduction. But he swore he didn't know where the bodies were. He claimed Mark was the mastermind, but Mark maintained his innocence, claiming he only wanted to scare Sarah, not kill her. With the two men blaming each other, the full truth was still just out of reach. The location of Sarah, Emily, and Lily remained a mystery. But one thing was clear. The discovery of the shoes was not a clue to where the bodies were buried. It was a taunt. The confessions of Mark Anderson and David Shaw, while a major breakthrough, painted a confusing and incomplete picture. Mark, the father of the missing girls, insisted the plan was only to abduct Sarah and the twins to frighten Sarah into giving him full custody. He claimed he never wanted them harmed. David Shaw, on the other hand, claimed Mark had a much darker plan from the beginning. He told police that Mark was deeply in debt and had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Sarah and the girls just weeks before the disappearance. Shaw said he was promised a cut of the insurance money to help with the abduction. The new, chilling details from the confessions led the police to a new, terrifying conclusion. This wasn't just about custody, it was about money. And it was no longer a disappearance, it was a triple murder. The RCMP, with the new information, began a massive new search. Shaw had confessed to taking part in the abduction, but had given vague, confusing details about where the bodies were. He claimed they were buried in an old, abandoned mine shaft, but when pressed for details, he would contradict himself, naming a different location each time. He was either lying, or he truly didn't know. He claimed Mark had gone on ahead to the mine with Sarah and the girls, and that when he arrived, they were already gone. The police found Shaw's story suspicious, but they had to follow every lead. They began to use a new, highly specialized team of geologists to search for old, forgotten mines on Vancouver Island, cross-referencing their findings with the locations Shaw had mentioned. The search took months, and it was a grueling, frustrating process, but the police were determined to find the truth, no matter how long it took. The forensic team, in the meantime, had a breakthrough of their own. They went back to the old campsite where the rusted cans of tuna and the broken flashlight had been found. They analyzed the soil and the plant matter around the site, and using advanced pollen analysis, were able to determine that the campsite had been active for several weeks in the summer of 1991. This contradicted Shaw's confession that the family was only there for one night. It seemed the Andersons had been held captive there. But by whom? And why? The next clue came from the toy soldier. The police had a forensic artist create a highly detailed render of the toy, including the unique crack on its arm. They then released the image to the public, asking for anyone with information to come forward. And they got a call. A woman who had been a cashier at a toy store in Vancouver in the early 90s remembered a man who came in and bought a specific brand of plastic toy soldiers in bulk. The man, she recalled, had a distinctive scar on his left hand. The police showed her the photo of the toy soldier, and she confirmed it was the same type. The man, she said, was a regular customer. He had a habit of talking about his project, a long-term goal to start over somewhere remote. She couldn't remember his name, but she did remember his face. The police had a new lead, a new suspect, and the truth was about to emerge from the shadows of the past. The haunting mystery of the Anderson family was about to be solved, but the truth would be far more shocking and tragic than anyone could have ever imagined. The woman's memory of the man with the distinctive scar on his left hand provided the final missing piece of the puzzle. Detective Miller and his team cross-referenced the description with the police's criminal database and found a hit. His name was Robert Finch. He had a record for minor theft and assault, but he was most known for his bizarre survivalist beliefs and a desire to live completely off the grid. He was also a former acquaintance of Sarah's, a colleague from her yoga studio. But he had been dismissed as a suspect early on because he had no clear motive and a strong alibi. Or so everyone thought. The alibi that had saved Robert Finch from suspicion in 1991 was that he was with his brother in a secluded cabin in the wilderness near Whistler, BC, hundreds of kilometers from Vancouver Island. The original investigators had simply taken his brother's word for it. But Detective Miller's team, with the benefit of hindsight and modern technology, dug deeper. They contacted Robert's brother, who was now an elderly man living in a nursing home. When asked again about that time, he broke down and confessed. He had lied for his brother. Robert had never been with him. He had been on Vancouver Island the entire time. Robert Finch had a very specific, twisted motive. He was a recluse who had developed a dangerous obsession with Sarah and her children. He believed they were pure spirits who had to be saved from the corruption of modern society. He had been planning their abduction for months. The pieces finally fell into place. Robert Finch had been camping in the remote area north of Souk for weeks, preparing a crude, secluded hideout. He had followed Sarah and her girls for months, watching their routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. On the morning of July 15, 1991, he ambushed the family as they were leaving for a short walk. He took them to his campsite, where he held them captive. His intention wasn't to kill them, but to indoctrinate them into his radical beliefs. But something went terribly wrong. During their captivity, Sarah fought back. She managed to escape and tried to run with her daughters, but in the struggle, she was tragically killed. The girls, terrified and alone, ran into the deep woods. Robert, fearing the police, fled the scene, leaving Sarah's body and the girls behind. He had returned to the area a few months later to retrieve some of his belongings, and he had found one of the children's shoes. In a sick, twisted gesture, he had placed it near the old mine shaft, knowing it would confuse investigators. He was never a suspect. He was a ghost. The police arrested Robert Finch. He initially denied everything, but when confronted with the evidence, he finally confessed. He led them to a hidden, shallow grave where Sarah's remains had been buried. He also led them to another site, where he had seen the twins. He described how the girls were lost, scared, and alone in the woods, running from him. The police knew there was no way the children could have survived. They had perished somewhere in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. The case was finally solved. The truth was far more tragic and chilling than anyone could have ever imagined. The Andersons weren't the victims of a big conspiracy. They were the victims of a lone, delusional man and a tragic series of events. The discovery of the shoes wasn't just a clue, it was a memorial to a tragedy that had gone unsolved for 14 years. The verdict was a solemn one. Robert Finch was found guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Sarah Anderson. He was sentenced to life in prison. But the true fate of Emily and Lily, the two young twin girls, remained a mystery. While Finch had led police to the area where he last saw them, their bodies were never found. The vast, dense forests of Vancouver Island had claimed them. The community of Souk and all of Canada finally had answers, but the closure was bittersweet. The case of the missing Anderson family was no longer a cold case, but a chilling reminder of a tragedy that could have been prevented. The lives of a loving mother and her two children were lost to a twisted obsession, a crime that went unsolved for over a decade. The legacy of the Anderson case still lingers on Vancouver Island. It's a story told in whispers, a cautionary tale about the dark secrets that can hide in plain sight. It changed the way the RCMP approached cold cases, emphasizing the importance of re-examining old evidence with new technology. The crumpled photo, the anonymous phone call, the old toy soldier, all dismissed as insignificant at the time, all holding the key to the truth. For the family of Sarah and the girls, there was no perfect resolution. The empty space left by the twins remains, a wound that will never fully heal. They never got to say a proper goodbye. The discovery of the children's shoes in the old mine shaft remains the most haunting part of the story. It was a cry for help from beyond the grave, a deliberate act by a man who was taunting the police. It was the detail that reopened the case, that brought a long-forgotten tragedy back into the light. And it was a reminder that some mysteries, no matter how cold, are never truly dead. They lie in wait, sometimes for decades, for a single piece of evidence to bring them back to life. This case stands as a tribute to the power of perseverance and to the families who never give up hope. It's a reminder that even when all seems lost, the truth will eventually find a way to emerge from the darkness.